All right, so let's stay on the topic of the border and illegal immigration. We're going to bring another panel on now. Let's bring on Andrew Arthur, fellow in law and policy with the Center for Immigration Studies and former immigration judge, and Javier Palomarez, founder and CEO of the U.S. Hispanic Business Council. He's also a former advisor to the Obama and McCain campaigns. Andrew, Javier, great having you both on today. Let's start with what we just heard there, what me and my colleague Kevin were talking about there, that memo that the president signed, which essentially gave the Roosevelt Reservation to the DOD as this buffer zone along the border. Javier, let's start with you. How would you rate the president's speed in combating the border crisis in the past 100 days?
I think he's had a lot of effort. I tend to focus on three basic areas when I'm looking at the 100 days. Executive orders comes to mind. He's had over 124 executive orders, more than any president. He's chosen executive orders kind of as opposed to receiving counsel or taking counsel from cabinet members or advisors. He's circumventing the congressional approval process. And I certainly see kind of the strategy behind that, right? He's a man that wants to get things done. He's in a rush, and he wants to enact his policies and his vision as quickly as possible. With all that said, only 5 bills have actually passed into law. And so there's the rhetoric and everything we see in the media, and then there's the reality of what's actually happening. I think there's a lot yet to see. I don't think it's as doom and gloom as some others in my Democratic Party believe it is. I think there's hope yet. But it remains to be seen. There's some approval stuff that's going on, but we can talk about that in a bit.
Andrew, I'll give you a moment to respond and to just give your initial analysis of the president's performance on the border.
Well, as a person who has to report daily about what the president's doing on the border and on immigration, I can tell you, I almost wish he'd slow down because these orders, the decisions that they're making, the arrest, the sealing of the border, all of these things are coming at a lightning pace. Donald Trump took office knowing that as soon as he took his hand off the Bible, he was a lame duck, and he only has 4 years to accomplish the promises that he made on the campaign trail, particularly with respect to the border, particularly with respect to criminal aliens in the United States, and particularly with respect to some high-profile criminal organizations, MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. And he's definitely taken some very strong stances on that, which has put him at odds with a number of federal district court judges. But there's no doubt that he's delivering on what he said. So, things thus far are pretty good.
So let's talk about the legality of some of the actions he's taken here. Javier, some legal analysts are saying that with this memo in relation to the Roosevelt Reservation, the president is trying to skirt a law here that prohibits the military from conducting law enforcement. Is this a concern to you?
It is, to the extent that, to the point that Andrew made, that he's constantly going to get challenged. He's a man on a mission. I see the rationale behind his moves. When you look at immigration overall, including the border, despite the harsh rhetoric and the salacious headlines on mass deportations and the like, consider that he's only deported about 140 people. That's less than Biden or Obama deported in their first 100 days. And to that end, those are mostly criminals, which I am completely behind. And so, again, I think that you have to parse out what you're hearing in terms of the media and the rhetoric and look at the facts. I agree that, he's doing things in a very unconventional manner. He campaigned on that. He's living up to that promise of taking action. I think it remains to be seen just how far his agenda will go. I can tell you that there is one law in particular that we were very supportive of, and we got both Republican and Democrats on both sides of the aisle to play along with this, and that was the Laken Riley Act, which affords the faster deportation of illegal criminals. It's these types of things that I focus on. It's the meat and potatoes. There's the rhetoric, there's the media, and there's what he's actually accomplishing. And I think that in and of itself is good, despite what appears to be a climbing disapproval rate right now in its first 100 days.
Before we go to Andrew, Javier, go deeper for us on this Laken Riley Act, because, of course, that I think anyone will agree that was a devastating case. So sad. What does this act tell the American people? What kind of message does President Donald Trump send to foreigners as well with that act?
You know, I have to tell you that I was 1,000% behind the Laken Riley Act, and we worked with Republicans like Juan Ciscomani and Bernie Moreno and Ted Cruz, and you know, as a known Democrat, they were more than willing to hear us out. This was unanimously, I think, amongst the people I was talking to, an approach that everyone approved of. It's the right kind of law. It gets at the issue. You know, I was delighted at the lightning speed in which it happened. And it was part of a broader strategy that instead of doing some huge kind of larger reform, they started to take the issues one at a time and focusing almost surgically on the issues that were triaged and managed and effectively, you know, handled. Laken Riley is an example of that. They didn't try to do some sweeping reform and bundle everything into it. Instead, they said, hey, let's look at the most critical issues and where can we enact, you know, rules, regulations, and laws that are useful, that are common sense, that are going to get uniform support. Laken Riley is an example of that. I'd love to see more of that, frankly, than, you know, some comprehensive approach that we know has not worked before, either under an administration that was Republican or Democrat. The huge, sweeping, comprehensive approach is just too difficult. I love the way in which they're approaching this. It's much more like a business. You triage the issues, you take them one at a time, you're surgical about it, and you're fast. And I got to agree, Laken Riley is an example of what could happen with this president in the White House.
Andrew, your response.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with Javier more. I mean, if you look at what the Biden administration was doing, the Biden administration deliberately didn't take into custody criminal aliens who had committed crimes. In fact, they got sued by the states of Texas and Louisiana. That case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically gave the Biden administration a blank check not to arrest criminal aliens in the United States because it found that those states didn't have standing to challenge the non-arrest of anybody. Fast forward to the Laken Riley Act. It empowers states' attorneys general to sue this administration or any future administration when it fails to take criminal aliens off the streets, to detain them and to remove them from the United States. That's absolutely key. Javier and I can disagree about, you know, various immigration policies, but I think that what 95% of the American population agrees on is that if you're here illegally and you've committed a crime, if you've harmed a United States citizen, or you've harmed a green card holder, you need to leave. You've given up your right to live in this country, and you need to go. But you actually did make a very important point earlier about the Roosevelt Reservation. That's a strip of land that the federal government has retained for itself ever since the Teddy Roosevelt administration. That's what it's named for. Between Mexico and the United States. That's an area that we can operate in. For decades, that was controlled by the Department of the Interior. You know, they sent rangers out there into often hostile territory. That has now been ceded, at least on a test basis, in New Mexico to the Department of Defense. Now, those park rangers, and Chris Egley is a prime example, killed by smugglers more than a decade ago, you know, they go into that very unprotected. When you've got U.S. Marines in battle rattle, the sort that I saw when I was down in San Diego 3 weeks ago, they're not going to stand by while people smuggle drugs into the United States. Now, again, their ability to arrest people is extremely limited. I know that Javier would agree with me on that. But their ability to be a show of force, to be a show of deterrence, to tell the smugglers it's a new day, fentanyl can't pour into this country anymore, that's a game changer.
And Andrew, along these lines, President Trump, he's also saying that he's looking into the legality of sending U.S. citizens who have committed violent crimes to foreign prisons, most notably here, El Salvador. Is there a legal pathway to that?
No, not really. Under United States law, we don't have the ability to exile U.S. citizens. I certainly understand the instinct behind the president's statements. People in the United States are frustrated with crime. You know, I left Baltimore, Maryland. I can tell you all about crime. We can take the next hour. And, you know, upset with lawlessness, you know, on college campuses and on our streets. And the president ran promising to end that. Now, you know, one of my rules of thumb, and I can't even remember who said it first, always take Donald Trump seriously, but don't always take him literally. We have plenty of jail space in the United States to hold our homegrown criminals. It's not going to be necessary for us to send those people abroad. And besides, the two other branches, the legislative and the judicial branch, might have something to say about that. But when it comes to, you know, finding countries like El Salvador and others that are willing to take aliens that we don't have the ability to remove back to their home countries, particularly, you know, criminal aliens, and Trinidad Aragua is a well-oiled criminal machine. That really is a game changer because we no longer have to countenance their presence here in the United States. We can move them to another place that can then move them back home.
All right, on that point, here's Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt last week speaking on this topic and mentioning what she called these activist judges. Take a listen.
And we also need rogue district court judges to stop acting as judicial activists, trying to block the administration from deporting illegal criminals from our nation's interior. The American public elected the president to do this, and he's following through with that promise.
Javier, your reaction to that, as well as Andrew's points earlier.
You know, the young woman's got a job to do, and I completely understand. The fact of the matter is, if you look at this president's first 100 days, there are some definite challenging areas. I think certainly the media has taken a particular look at his first 100 days. You know, he's got an approval rating that, you know, was at 47% when he first got into office. It's dropped down to 41%. He's got a disapproval rate that was at 52% when he first took over. It's risen by 7 points up to 59%. You know, in both cases, Obama and Biden outdid him. That's fair. But Obama and Biden did not have the activity that this president has had. This guy's on a mission. He is looking to make, you know, a statement. He's done some things that, as a Democrat, I have to say I fully support. I believe that there is a lot of good that's potentially here. I think as a nation and certainly as a business association, we're taking a breath. We're taking a look. There's, again, the media coverage. There's the salaciousness of everything that's going on. Some would say he's gone too far in some areas. Some would say he's not gone far enough. The fact of the matter is that as a business association, we look at the real issues, the real impact, what's actually happening. And oftentimes what you see in the media, what gets reported and what's actually happening is quite different. Overall, I see a president that is sticking to his agenda, that is stubbornly looking at it from a very different perspective. As uncomfortable as that might be, I think there's been some real successes there. And if they can zero in on how to get more of the good things done, he campaigned on, bringing prices down for the average American family, on lessening regulation for the American business community, on making America great again by bringing manufacturing back. If he can focus on those things and continue to hone in on how to get that part of the agenda done, I think we're going to have a great presidency here. The first 100 days, if you look at just approvals and disapprovals, his disapproval rate is concerning. But then again, look at the agenda this man has taken on. Look at the actions he's taken on his own volition. And so he's invited that disapproval, and he is very comfortably plowing forward. And I have to admit, I respect that. We'll see what happens in the next 100 days. And in the next 3 years, for that matter, but I see some bright spots here. I really do.
So, Andrew, to the point of the president just hammering, just really going for it and trying to get his agenda accomplished, we're seeing his administration starting to arrest these judges that are allegedly obstructing ICE deportation efforts. Yesterday, Press Secretary Leavitt, she didn't rule out arresting a Supreme Court judge. So as the Trump administration makes these arrests and makes these comments, do you see any concern for the potential politicization of the judicial branch, or could it be the opposite here?
Yeah, no, and it's important to put Ms. Leavitt's statements into context and to talk about the two judges in question. One of the judges, the state court judge in New Mexico, actually had a group of individuals living with him who were in some way, or at least one of them was affiliated with Tren de Aragua. When that individual was arrested, that judge took the guy's phone, broke it, and hid the pieces that he had broken. That's obstruction of justice. With respect to the judge in Wisconsin, she knew that ICE was there with FBI agents to arrest an individual who had illegally re-entered the United States, came once and was deported, came back in, and then was, on trial for assaulting people. He hit one person 30 times. And that judge allowed that individual to sneak out the back door of her courtroom in order to allow him to escape ICE enforcement. Immigration enforcement is a federal issue. I can understand that state court judges and state legislators have, strong feelings about it. But that is not reason to, engage in what is criminal activity under federal law. Now, I don't think Donald Trump is going to go arresting Elena Kagan or John Roberts, unless, of course, they allow somebody to sneak out the back door of their courtroom. I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, you need to put all of these things into context. What he has done, what happened in the case of those two judges, those are criminal actions. And quite frankly, I wore a black robe. It didn't make me immune from prosecution. It was supposed to remind me of my fidelity to the law. And so, that's not acceptable. With respect to the other cases that are going on, district court judges, a lot of them don't have any background in this. They have strong feelings. They're going to rule. That's why we have courts of appeal. That's why we have a Supreme Court.
Okay, so a key term that we keep hearing with these deportation plans is due process. And of course, we've been hearing that with the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So here's Senator Chris Van Hollen speaking about that after his earlier visit to Abrego Garcia in El Salvador. Take a look.
This should not be an issue for Republicans or Democrats. This is an issue for every American who cares about our Constitution, who cares about personal liberty, who cares about due process, and who cares about what makes America so different, which is adherence to all of those things. This is an American issue.
Okay, so Vice President J.D. Vance, he has said that due process was followed in this case. Andrew, break this down really quickly for us. What is the federal government really obligated to provide here exactly?
Well, in this, it's a very complicated case. Mr. Abrego Garcia is accused of being an MS-13 member. On that basis, one immigration judge refused to grant him bond, finding he was a danger to the community. The case then went to another immigration judge who issued probably one of the more interesting decisions I've ever read, and I've read thousands of them, granting this individual something called withholding of removal. He's under a final order of removal, but his removal is withheld from one country, and the government contends that is El Salvador and that they removed him in error. The problem is that he's been sent back to El Salvador, his home country. And the country of El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, has put him into a jail there, probably because they think he's an MS-13 member too. And the Nayib Bukele government of El Salvador is currently at war with MS-13. So in essence, if you go back to the Brittany Griner situation where a female basketball player was in jail in Russia, we had to engage in deep diplomatic negotiations to get a U.S. citizen out of a Russian jail. In the Maryland District Court, the judge ordered the government to successfully engage in such diplomacy and to do so on a very tight time frame, get Mr. Abrego Garcia back by April 7th. I have a feeling that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is going to be coming home, that we're going to find a lot more out about Abrego Garcia, and that Chris Van Hollen may not want to be hanging around with him much after that. But I don't know. And the evidence is out there. We need to see what's going on. There are definitely allegations on both sides. And it's important to note Abrego Garcia denies that he's an MS-13 member. So stay tuned. We'll find out what's going on with that. But mistakes happen in government. Unfortunately, this is one. It affects an individual. But, people have a lot of facts on both sides of the argument. We'll see how it comes out.
And Javier, building off of what Andrew is saying there, plaintiffs in a lot of these cases, they're saying things like they received deportation notices that were written in English when they only spoke Spanish, or there wasn't enough information on how to really contest these deportation orders. Javier, we've also spoken before about the impact of this deportation plan on industries like agriculture and hospitality. Tell us more about what you're hearing firsthand from these communities.
Well, we are hearing firsthand about the fear and trepidation. As you know, I work with the agricultural sector, the hospitality sector, manufacturing, et cetera. It is very concerning, and it's really just the fear factor. Again, let's look at the facts. Despite all of the coverage and all the salacious, narrative and rhetoric that's been built around the mass deportations, they've deported a grand total of a little less than 140,000 people, less than Obama had in his first 100 days, less than Biden had in his first 100 days. I agree with the judge. The vast majority of these were known criminals or people who were here to do us harm. Completely agree with that. Are there going to be some glitches, some hiccups? Of course. Anything this rapid, anything this complicated, anything this massive, there's going to be the occasional, where we got it wrong. I think we need to focus on the intent of the law and get behind it as a nation. I, for one, have been talking about and would love for the president to enact the Trump visa, the temporary residence for undocumented migrant professionals to afford, some help for critical industries like agriculture, where 83% of the workers are actually of immigrant background, like manufacturing, where 54% of the workers are actually of immigrant background, and even technology. And so I think by focusing again on what the campaign promised, which was to make life better, to make the economy stronger, and lower prices for American families, we need a visa that affords these individuals who we know are here to do well, to work hard, to contribute. The Trump visa, the temporary residence for undocumented migrant professionals, does not afford government benefits to a recipient. It does not afford voting rights to a recipient, nor does it afford citizenship to a recipient. In addition, the recipient has to pay taxes of anywhere from 10 to 20%. These are common sense, quick fixes that we could put into place to alleviate the fear in what is already a bunch of struggling but critical industries, again, like manufacturing, construction, hospitality, and agriculture, and find a way to move forward, again, taking one step at a time, being decisive, getting something done to alleviate the problem and afford, the American economy some semblance of stability so we can move forward. I'm looking forward to having that discussion with the president to highlight how something like the Trump visa could be a fix that is sustainable because it makes sense, and these recipients would actually pay their way because they'd have taxes on their income.
All right, gentlemen, I've got around 1 minute here, so 30 seconds to each of you. Closing statements here. What do you hope to see from the president to ensure a safe border in this presidency and beyond this presidency? Javier, 30 seconds.
I think keep up the heat. He is absolutely focused on deporting and quickly identifying people who are here to do us harm, known criminals. That's exactly the right approach. But balance that with a way to help those who are here to help grow the American economy and pay their way.
And Andrew, final word to you today.
We've already seen a lot of good things happen. In February and March, the number of the backlog of the immigration cases in immigration court actually dropped for the first time in 2008. I think that you're going to have a lot of people who are here illegally, particularly who are criminals, self-deport. They're not going to show up in that 140,000 figure that Javier discussed. But I think we're going to see more of the same. But, keep your eye on Donald Trump. As Javier indicated, he's a man who's tough on immigration, but he may also, start cutting some deals because he has a vision for, what the immigration system should be. And he seems bound and determined to bring it into effect.
Yeah, well, illegal immigration, border crisis, those were huge promises on the campaign trail. And I'm sure, as you both mentioned, a lot more is going to come out of this. Andrew Arthur, Javier Palomarez, great having you both on today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.